Hello everyone and welcome to another Lazy Blender tutorial. Today we're going to be teaching you how to manually combine materials and atlas your textures, and we're going to be doing that via baking. So in order for you to follow along to this tutorial, you are going to want these couple add-ons enabled. Go up to edit preferences, go to add-ons, search up UV and enable magic UV. This one you're not going to use often. We just kind of need it for this one specific use case. Node Wrangler is another one you are going to need, and you probably already have this one enabled if you've ever worked with the shader graph before. Okay, to get started, you probably, if you haven't set it up before, whenever you start up a new Blender project, it's normally looking like this with a timeline down here. Go ahead, there's a little corner. I hope my head's not in the way, and go to shader editor. And then once again in this corner, get this little cross, click and drag out. It's gonna split that view, change this to your UV editor. All right, now hopefully you have an object with multiple materials set up. Delete that. Now, you should be in Cycles over here, and in this little camera, you want to be using the Cycles render engine. Be sure you're on GPU compute if you have a powerful GPU. If you don't, then CPU is fine. Also, if you are using GPU compute, be sure that you are using the best possible render devices here. For RTX, you want to use OptiX, and then make sure you only have your graphics card selected. If you have your CPU selected, you can get some weird issues where it will still bake on your CPU. So make sure you do that. And for today, we're going to be using Emit to bake, because whenever you do that and you're using Node Wrangler, you can Control-Shift-Left click and it will output to your surface. And this is actually an emission. As you can see here, I can go up to the render passes and emission, and there you go. Okay, but we can just go back to fine. All right, in order to bake, what you're going to want to do, first off, the way baking works is it will look at what object you have active. It will look at what texture you have selected in every material on that object, and it will bake whatever bake type to that texture using, now this, a lot of people don't know this, but it will use whatever UV map you have selected. So with that in mind, what we're going to do, some setup required is, well, first of all, make sure you already have a pretty good, actually no, your UV map set up here. Doesn't matter for this original UV map. You probably, if you have multiple objects, they probably all have their own textures and their own UV maps, but some of them might be like this here, where there's no texture, it's just a color. Either way, what you're going to want to do is make a new UV map, and this by default copy over your original UV map. And then what you're going to want to do is hit end, open up the end menu, magic UV, enable pack UVs, and then pack those UVs with the new UV map selected. And so it will generate a nice clean UV map with no overlaps. Hopefully, hopefully no overlaps. All right, now that you have your UV map set up, go in, Shift A into your text, into your shader graph, create a new image texture. Well, I'm using a VR headset for this, so it's a little hard to see. Make a new texture, call it whatever you want. I'm going to use 4K for this case. Whenever baking, it's best to use bigger textures to preserve all details, because you're going to end up with smaller UVs. You can, if you're using these textures for like Unity, you can just downscale them later down the line to change, just to optimize. But it's always best just to initially use a larger texture. Okay, now over here in your UV editor, find that texture and hit Alt S to save it. Save it wherever you want. And yes, please save. Now, once again, back to the shader graph, Control C to copy that node and go to every single material and paste it in just to make sure it's there. Okay, now, like I've said before, we are baking emission. So make sure you're outputting to the surface whatever you want to actually bake. In this case, we're outputting the principal BSDF, which is not what we want. We want to output this red color, which we can't just drag to the surface. That doesn't work. So what you can do is go Shift A color and do RGB curve, and mouse over this, Control C, mouse over this, Control V, and then we can Control Shift. So Control Shift click, and it will output that. And then, okay, now our materials are set up. Select the image you want to bake to. Make sure the, oh no, don't do that. Make sure the UV map, the correct UV map you want to bake to is selected. And then also just double check that you have the correct object selected. All right. And once you've done that, you can go ahead and hit bake. All right. And that took about a minute. It wasn't too bad for this one, but for you, it might have taken a lot longer. That is perfectly normal. But once your bake is done, make sure you go over here and hit Alt S to save this texture. Also, if you messed up and had the wrong texture selected over here, now would be a good chance, a good time to go back, and you'll see it won't be the right texture anymore. And you can hit image and reload up here to reload the original texture. Because if you save this on accident, like if you accidentally baked over the wrong texture and saved it, that texture is lost forever, which is why Blender doesn't automatically save. All right, but I did it right. So it is here. I hit save. We're good. This is just a color map. So now we can plug this in here. We can output that, and that's not right. Why is that? Well, because we are still using the wrong UV map over here. Now, you might be tempted to just do this, and that fixes it for now. But if I exported this and imported it into Unity, Unity will automatically use the first UV map. I believe it would use the first UV map. Don't quote me on that. But first, before you do anything, duplicate this, because from here on out, we're going destructive. We're going to be deleting the UV map and deleting the materials, which we would have to reset up if we messed things up when we found out later down the line. There would be no way to get the old materials back, the old UVs map. So it's best just to duplicate before you move on and hide that, just to save a backup. But now we have that backup created, we can get rid of that UV map, rename this to UV map, just for consistency's sake. Now we can delete these materials, make a new one, call it whatever you want. And then we can Shift A, grab our image texture, or you can just go over here and mouse over this and drag it. Just click and drag over here to spawn in the texture. It's a neat little thing you can do. Plug that into base color and you're good to go. If you have multiple inputs, like if you have an emission map, if you have a metallic map, you can repeat the same steps multiple times. And that's actually where this backup will come in handy, is you can keep baking using the backup and just apply the textures to your new object. Yep. And that is about it. Now, that is just one use case for baking that I haven't seen a lot of people talk about. So that's why I wanted to make this tutorial. I'm sure a lot of people know about using the selective to active to bake a high poly mesh down to a lower poly mesh, and like baking that high detail into a normal map. But I don't see a lot of people talking about baking in the context of atlasing. So I hope y'all learned something new throughout this video. I try to keep it as condensed as possible while still giving a lot of helpful info. If you like the video, leave a like. If not, rant down below in the comments. I'll be watching that. Yeah, that's all. I'm Apple. You've been you. Have a wonderful day.